What is this about?
It's about the start of it for me. I guess I should begin there. The start of it for me was Hurricane Katrina. Sitting at home, I was talking to my father, who was driving down to Houston from Kansas to go, help our sister board up her house, and then, after talking to him, watching, as we all did, watching the devastation on television, and especially around the Ninth Ward, which is mostly a lot of African American and or poor people, and it was just one of those bizarre kind of epiphanies, and one of those I guess kind of a tragic epiphany where you realize how much water has really affected the African American diaspora, and I just literally just said out loud, "Damn, water again." I started thinking about, of course, transatlantic slavery, and I started thinking about just all the connections historically water has played in my community. And probably sometime that same month, I wrote out this 2-page sort of manifesto about rituals called Rituals.of.water, and I started thinking about baptism and having one's identity changed and being moved and constantly against one's will. And so I wrote this project statement, as I always do for bodies work. I usually write a project statement, and then I'll sketch, and I'll conceptualize, and I'll have ideas about what I'm going to be doing. But this was the first time I actually wrote something out and had no idea what the work was going to look like whatsoever. Because to me it was such a large project. It was such an emotionally charged project that I didn't want to do something that was purely visceral. I didn't want to do something that was accusatory, but I didn't want to show. I didn't want to do something that was show my community as being victims. But I did want to do reflection of our history, and that's huge. How do you do that? How do you communicate those really strong ideas in a coherent manner? And because I think, at least for me, if I'm not communicating the ideas correctly to a larger audience, and they're not understanding it, and on some level, either rather aesthetic or conceptual, then what's the point? So I guess probably a good 5 years went by. There was some other projects I did in between, and about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, I moved into a new studio space, and I finally sat down like, how am I going to do this? And all the while I had been collecting photographs from the internet in various places, and still not knowing what I was going to do with them. And but at the same time, I also had these large sheets of watercolor paper that are extremely heavy. And I thought, I can paint. And so the first version of him for arms, when I first started out, it was boring, for lack of a better word. It was pretty much me doing a black and white painting of a black and white photograph. And that's not what I wanted. It wasn't achieving. There was no emotional impact there. There was a little bit too much distance there. And then talking to a studio mate who came over, and she just said, for everything that I had laid out there, so she comes to my studio, I've got ink, I've got all these like brushes, I've got all this water all over the place, and she's like, for everything you have out here, it's really too tight. So I came up with the idea of just, if I wanted to make images of individuals that looked like they were being affected by water, they really should look like they were being affected by water, and some parts just look spontaneous, or like a deluge was happening.
Yeah, I guess perhaps for many of us, one of the quotes about water is probably Martin Luther King's, "We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Of course, that's Martin Luther King's paraphrase of biblical words, the prophet Amos. And as you look at some of the work, some of it is obviously the Civil Rights Movement, and you could see that. But you know, there is water in each of the instances, the rituals that Rodney talks about. As you look at the work, just I guess a suggestion is that it's not one middle passage, one civil rights movement, but it's sort of a mix. And so, Rodney, maybe you sort of give us a little tour around the room of what works. Your source material is quite wonderful, but at your four pieces, your four themes, could you sort of walk us around the room, where things fit together, where your juxtaposition of images is different?
Sure. So, I guess starting with the ones behind me, these are the first ones I started with, and so I knew I wanted to start with the transatlantic slavery, and I definitely wanted to center around the idea of the triangle trade. So these three, the text is different from the text in our other one because it doesn't overtly reflect the text of water. So you see for souls, for sugar, and for arms, and that was the base of the triangle trade, basically for trading. You see guns, sugar, people. Then I think rum was in there at some point, so it kept that because the sugar was made into rum, and rum was traded again. So that's where I started. I knew I wanted to do those, and so as far as the source material, when I just researching online, and I found these three images that were turn of the 18th and the 19th century daguerreotypes. So I used those for the first ones, and so I wanted to do something around transformation of baptism, and so other than the jars that are above your heads, the two images on the wall of District 1 and District number 2, those will reflect the idea of baptism of these former slaves who have, their religion has been changed, their bodies have certainly been changed through the labor they had to do, and to a large extent, their psyches have been changed. So that's another section. And then also dispersal, which I put on the subheading of the dry seasons. So which are all the pieces that deal with water cannons and being used during the Civil Rights Movement. So you have the piece over there which says universal solvent. You have the three on this wall over here, and the other two on the left-hand side by the door. And then Hurricane Katrina was, I could have stuck with that idea of Hurricane Katrina just completely and just did a whole body work around that, but I knew I wanted to get just one significant image that I wanted to portray, and that's the Madonna over there that's in the dam. And so I just sourced different photographs. I don't know where those photographs for Distant 1 and Distant 2 came from. Most of the pieces from the dry season came from the photographer Charles Moore, who spent a lot of time down south documenting the Civil Rights Movement during the 50s and 60s. Hurricane Katrina, the Madonna piece, I believe that's it's an AP photograph.
This gallery likes to showcase artists, and I'll just read it, whose art forms are revealing of things bent on a subversive contemporary point of view. Rodney, your career as an artist really explores history and tradition and values that are about something, either a post-9/11 world where you ask yourself, do you really feel safe? Are you secure where you are? It looks at recording our reality, perhaps, of an urban experience where there's violence often, when we least expect it, and almost every night there's some story on the news that is about something that's happening to members of your community or something that's happening where your friends may live. Are you the subversive Katya our curator thinks you are, or are you doing something else?
You know, some people will probably paint it as maybe being subversive, and I guess it depends on what filter they're using. I kind of have this nomadic existence growing up as a kid. You know, we moved a lot as a child, and so there was, our home was the four of us, and my parents always made reference to like aunts and uncles and grandparents and things like that, who we rarely saw. So maybe for me, it was the way I use art is the way I sort of filter the world and how I look at history. And my parents were always big on sort of examining my sisters and I history books and like, well, that's not right, or they're missing stuff. So my parents were always giving us articles as a kid, like, to sort of supplement what we're missing in school. So I think a lot of that research, a lot of that diligence they had, they still have to this day, about giving us this information about who we are and where we're from. I think it really filtered into my practice and affected who I am as an artist. If it's subversive to sort of look between the lines and look at history as being more intimate and less about who won and who lost, then yeah, I guess I'm being subversive.
In this group of images, there's dam and cleanness and clear and condensation and universal solvent. There are words that are part of the visual image as perhaps annotation, as perhaps clue to what you're seeing. How important is it that the words you pick or the narrative that's there, how important is it that people get it? I mean, it's subtle, it's not necessarily over your head. Unless you knew about the triangle trade, you may not know that for arms, for sugar, are key words in that almost a calculation, let's say. It's a little puzzle, go figure. How important is it that people get it? It's really important. It's as much as I'm making it for this work for myself, I'm also making it for an audience and to try to share an experience. So when I was choosing a text, I made a conscious decision to use either synonyms of water or reference to water to again sort of retell this narrative, because it's for some of it it's pretty obvious because there's something wrong going on, or there's something traumatic or going on with these individuals. But I'm a big fan of either the spoken word or the written word when it comes to stories or narratives. So I wanted to sort of carry on that tradition of telling a story, even if it's just one word, or in this case I'm using